glad to be able to do it.
Thank you so much. And
Are we ready?
yes, our representative at RJ, Julia, would you like to kick us off? So we are streaming live on YouTube. So hello, Center School community. We have a very, very special guest with us today, as well as some of your peers who will have an opportunity to ask some questions at the end of our session. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest of honor, Katherine Applegate, as well as RJ Julia, bookstore that has set this up, and take it away.
Oh my gosh, welcome everybody, you guys. I can't believe this is like my first YouTube live event. So it's really, really fun. You go to a special school that they were able to jump right on this. I know a lot of you have gotten, books in the mail. So you are truly, truly blessed to be able to take part. So your school, everybody, they are teachers, administration, everybody's amazing. So I want to introduce our fabulous guest, who I've had the honor of being in discussion with before. One of my favorites, one of our store's favorites, and I know a lot of you too had gotten one of her books like a couple of weeks ago. So as a class, you're reading it. So it's really, really amazing. But Katherine Applegate's new book is The One and Only Bob. Oh my gosh, I'm in love with Bob. But I'm going to read you a little bit about Katherine. Applegate is the Newbery Medal winning and #1 New York Times best-selling author of numerous books for young readers, including The One and Only Ivan, Crenshaw, Wish Tree, the Endling series, the Roscoe Riley Rules chapter book series, and the Animorphs series. And she lives in California, and she's here with us today. So welcome, Katherine Applegate.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, as is my dog, Stan. He's such a ham. Yesterday, I had to do one of these, and I locked him up with my husband in another bedroom, and he insisted on coming out. He sits on my lap when I type, and I wanted you to see him anyway, because Stan is the model for Bob. And you will hear, he was my muse and my inspiration. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit, show you some slides, hopefully. And then we're going to do some questions and answers, and anything you want to ask, I will attempt to answer. So I'm going to now attempt to load up my quick presentation here, and we will talk a little bit about The One and Only Bob. But more generally, I wanted to talk to you about writing, because it's complicated and hard and frustrating sometimes. And I think, especially at your age, when you're just starting to tell your stories, sometimes it helps to hear from a professional writer that, we get frustrated too. I know this is a really weird time. It's been hard for all of us. You guys are home, and you've probably been having your moms and dads attempt to teach you. And I'm sure you miss your teachers and your friends and your librarians. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk about books a little bit. It's been weird for all of us, and I think you're being very brave and very flexible, because we're going through a really strange period in history, but it'll pass, and things will be back to normal soon. I wrote The One and Only Bob a while ago, but talking about it right now in the middle of all this craziness, chatting with you about a talking dog seems almost silly. But by the same token, maybe it's a really good time to talk about stories, because I think stories really help us figure out how to live our lives and how to practice being human. This is me as a young human. I think I was about 3 or 4. And like all kids, I had problems to deal with. I had something called OCD, which makes it kind of hard to focus sometimes. And I was very shy. and clearly I was not a good dresser. But I had another problem. I didn't like reading. And I always tell kids this when I do school visits because, you know, most of the writers you meet are going to tell you, "Oh, I loved books," with good reason. But I want you to know that not everybody's that way. I was not that way. I thought reading was really boring. Now, I have a daughter who happens to have dyslexia. That makes it very challenging to read, but you know, with good teachers, you can get over that. No, that wasn't my problem. I just thought it was boring until I found my best friend book, and that was Charlotte's Web. And for me, Charlotte's Web was like, oh, maybe reading isn't such a bad thing after all. I finally clicked and realized that hearing other people tell stories might be a really good way to have some entertaining fun and also learn something and maybe even grow as a person. But for you, it might be different. You may hate Charlotte's Web. You shouldn't, but you may. Maybe you love nonfiction. Maybe you love poetry. Maybe song lyrics. Maybe you still haven't figured out what you like. Graphic novels are a big choice for lots of people. It'll come. You'll figure it out. And when you find the right book, you are going to be a very happy person. So hang in there, because it took me a long time. I'm still a very slow reader. I kind of like to savor words. So I don't read as many books as I'd like. But at long last, I understand how fun it is. Now, this is a picture of me. I wasn't just a reluctant reader. I was a reluctant writer. So I got a degree in English. And then I became a toilet cleaner. You can't see that picture very well, which is, trust me, a good thing. I became a waitress. I was a really bad waitress, by the way. I'm kind of a klutz. And I once spilled 4 strawberry milkshakes on a man in a totally white suit. And I was so embarrassed, I thought, okay, maybe I should try writing. It's going to be embarrassing too. It's going to be a really maybe kind of public way to fail. But you know what? Maybe it'll be fun. And I started writing. I became what's called a ghostwriter. And a ghostwriter does not have her name on the books. And teachers, moms, people of a certain age will probably remember this series. It was called Sweet Valley. And I wrote 17 Sweet Valley twins as a ghostwriter. I also wrote, suddenly it's not cooperating here. Oh, that's so strange. There we go. I wrote a bunch of Disney books. And I wrote Little Mermaid and Aladdin and oh my gosh, you name it, I wrote it. And I wrote Mickey Mouse books, a lot of Mickey Mouse books. Then I started writing a series with my husband called Animorphs. And that was about kids who could turn into animals. It was actually a TV show, kind of a not great TV show long ago on Nickelodeon. And we wrote a book a month. There were lots of those books. Eventually, I started writing what I called my real books because they were single titles with a beginning and a middle and an end. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed writing about things that made me passionate and angry. And sometimes if you guys are trying to think about good things to write and you can't think of anything, ask yourself what makes you mad. Because sometimes you find real passion in your writing that way. I wrote this book called Home of the Brave. It was about a Sudanese refugee who had come to Minneapolis, which is a very cold city in the US. And it was because I was living there at the time and I thought it was so brave and amazing that people could come from Africa and change their entire lives and learn new language and customs and food and then have to deal with, 10-foot walls of snow sometimes. So that's why I wrote that story. I wrote a book called Crenshaw about a very large, very invisible cat because I wanted to talk about homelessness and hunger in our country and explore what it would be like to be a kid facing those things. I wrote a book called Wish Tree. And this was really fun because I wrote it from the point of view of a tree. I wrote this one because I wanted to talk about the changes we'd seen in our country, the many hate crimes we were seeing, the fact that we weren't really welcoming our neighbors as much. And I wanted to talk about community and about what that meant to me. I wrote a series called Endling, a trilogy. I'm on the last book right now. And that was to talk about endangered species. And the fun part of that was I got to make up my own species. This is called a Dairn. A Dairn is basically a glorified Labrador. It's a dog who can walk upright and has a pouch and can glide like a flying squirrel. That particular Dairn is named Bix. But how fun is it when you're writing to create entire worlds? When you're a writer, you can do whatever you want. You can create maps of entire universes. You can create entirely new species. You can make anything happen to your characters that you want to have happen. It's a very powerful job in a way. And that to me is one of the best parts. Some of you may know my book, The One and Only Ivan. And this was inspired by a true story. It's bizarre. There was this little baby gorilla living in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, snatched from his family. We assume that poachers killed his entire family, and he and another baby were shipped to Tacoma, Washington. They were ordered like you order a pair of shoes, and that's Ivan on the left. Poor Burma on the right died almost as soon as she got to the US of pneumonia. So Ivan went to live with a family, and he slept in the same bed with an 8-year-old boy, and he learned to open the refrigerator, and he rode motorcycles, and he had the strangest life imaginable. But eventually he got so big that they put him in this mall. Look at the very top there where it says world famous. That is a picture of Ivan. And that is where he lived for 27 years, 27, almost 30 years, all by himself. But the great thing about the story is that kids got involved and they got really mad about the way he was being treated. And eventually he was released to Zoo Atlanta, where he lived out the rest of his days. Now, when I wrote this story, I decided to fictionalize it. And I created a best friend. I couldn't bear to have Ivan sitting there for 30 years without a friend, right? So I created Bob the dog. And Bob, as you can see, looks very much like my own dog, Stan. At the time, I never dreamed I would end up writing a sequel to The One and Only Ivan. That's because when I was writing, and this, by the way, is my official author photo. That's because when I was writing Ivan, I was making a lot of mistakes. And I got so frustrated with Ivan that I almost threw it away. I always show kids this picture because I want you to know that writing is about rewriting and rewriting and making tons of mistakes. It's a lot like life that way. The only way you learn is to make mistakes. So when you guys are writing your own stories, don't expect your first draft to be any good. It's going to be horrible. And you don't have to show it to anybody. You just have to keep writing until you have a story that makes you happy. So I keep this little piece of paper on my desk. My problem here is, am I giving up on Ivan or not? And this is something I was writing to myself in a journal because I had decided this book was so bad, I was going to throw it away. No one would ever want to read about a gorilla. No one would ever want to read from the point of view of a gorilla. And I almost did throw it away. And then I decided, nah, I'll try again. And it went on to win something called a Newbery, which is a really cool thing. And it's been made into a movie. The movie comes out, we think, August 14th. And it has all these famous actors in it. It's both actors and what we call CGI, computer generated imagery. So the animals are computer generated, but it's like looking at real animals. It's just amazing work. And Helen Mirren plays a poodle, and Angelina Jolie is an elephant, and Danny DeVito plays Bob the dog. And if you've ever heard Danny DeVito, you know he is incredibly funny and very down to earth and sarcastic and streetwise. He's the perfect Bob. So I was really thrilled when I went to write the sequel and Danny DeVito agreed to do the audiobook. I haven't even heard it yet, but there's some wonderful clips online. You can see him actually recording in the studio. And it's so funny because now when I look at my own dog, Stan, I hear Danny DeVito in my head. I found when I was writing Bob that he was comic relief in the first book, but suddenly he had to take on the role of the main character. And I gave him some really big challenges. He goes through a hurricane. He tries to save a long lost sister. He flies in the middle of a tornado. I mean, he has some serious adventures, but mostly he's trying to figure out what responsibility means and what freedom means and what owning up to your own faults means. And most importantly, what forgiveness means, because Bob has a lot of things to forgive himself for, but also to forgive others for. He was a little tiny puppy and tossed out a window of a truck and left to live on his own as a stray for a long time. And he's having a hard time trusting humans. So one of the most important things I found writing this story was that it let me think about why we forgive and how we forgive and how important that can be, not just to the other person, but to yourself. So I got to write about all that stuff, but nonetheless, I got to have a lot of fun because Bob is a great character. He's hilarious, he's funny. And one of my favorite parts of the book is my canine glossary. I had one in Ivan because, you know, not all of us speak gorilla. Well, I decided to do the same thing for Bob. So there are lots and lots. This is a visual glossary because dogs have lots of behaviors, you know, things like play bow, where they're trying to invite you to play and things like that. I wanted to talk about that, their actual body language, but also there are particular words they like that you may not know about. For example, bed boogie, the circular dance performed by dogs before settling into bed. Or zoomies, that's this crazy burst of energy where they run around like nuts. Usually it's in the evening. If you've ever had a dog, especially a puppy, you know what I'm talking about. And one of my favorites, the water bowl of power. That is the jumbo-sized ceramic dish and uncomfortable human chair generally found in bathrooms. I think you know what I'm talking about there. So that was one of the best parts. I got to kind of create my own dog vocabulary, and that was just one of the many parts of writing, and it's why it's so much fun. While you guys are having your downtime this summer and you're sitting around and you're bored, I highly recommend trying to write a few stories and do it for yourself. Do something that really matters to you. That's the most important thing in the world. So I think we have some questions.
Yeah.
Let's hear them.
Right, so I'll go through. So the first person that I'm seeing on my screen is Alyssa. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi.
Hi. My question was, how did you come up with the one and only for both of the books, like the one and only Ivan and the one and only Bob?
Oh, that's such a good question because titles are so hard. And I'm really bad at it. I get really frustrated. So the one and only worked really well for Ivan, but it took us a long time. It finally occurred to me that it was the kind of thing that you would say about a circus animal. And if you've read the one and only Ivan, you know he's in this kind of mall circus. So the one and only, as the kind of thing an announcer would say, also had this double meaning. Because he was the one and the only gorilla, right? And so when we went to do Bob, I tried everything. I wanted it to sound like the one and only, have that same cadence, that same rhythm. And I probably came up with 100 ideas, and so did my publisher. And then I realized something. Every time I did a school visit, kids would come up to me and they go, "Are you going to do the one and only Bob?" So they kind of already written the title for me. And I realized, obviously, that's got to be the title. So I'm glad you asked that.
Thank
All
you.
right, great question. Next, I see Pearl. Go ahead and ask your question.
My question is, what inspired you to write the animal series?
Oh, that's a really good question. It was funny. My husband and I were in Florida, and we've been doing lots of ghost writing. And I remember, this is weird, but we were walking our cat on a leash because we lived near a pond with alligators, and alligators were eating all the cats. But the cat loved to go outside. So we're walking around, it's night, and I said, I would love to write a book series where kids could kind of pretend what it's like to be an animal, get into the heads of animals. And my husband said, "That's a great idea, but it's got to be sci-fi. It's got to be science fiction, and you're going to need something like aliens in it to make it all happen." And so we kind of put those two very different ideas together, and it worked. It was really fun to write.
All right, thank you, Pearl. Next up, Emily, go ahead with your question.
So my question was, who are some of your favorite authors, and did any of them give you ideas to write any of your stories?
Oh, I have so many favorites. I do have some author friends that I connect with, and we'll talk about ideas. More often than not, what we talk about is, "Oh my gosh, I'm having a really bad day. I'm so frustrated. I'm going to throw this book against the wall." And that's really, it's nice to have people to commiserate with. And my husband, as it happens, is a writer. So that I have a in-house writer, which is very convenient. He's very good at plotting, so that helps me a lot. But I love, so many. I love Kate DiCamillo's books because they're so full of heart. I love Rebecca Stead. She has a new book out called The List of Things That Will Not Change. It's beautiful. And I love the way she chooses her words so carefully. I love Jason Reynolds. He wrote a book called Long Way Down. It's like incredibly intense, full of action. I have one of my friends is Jennifer Choldenko, who wrote the Al Capone series. And she has a new book out in, I think it's the end of May, called Orphan 11. That is, it has elephants in it, which I love. And it's funny, and it's kind of a mystery. It's wonderful. Probably one of my favorite authors of all is E.B. White, who is sadly no longer with us, who wrote Charlotte's Web and Trumpet of the Swan and Stuart Little. And I think he was just a magnificent writer.
All right, thank you, Emily. Next, Alex, you can unmute and ask your question.
What inspired you to become an author?
Alex, I try really hard to be honest about that, because the truth is I needed a job, and it was the thing that I seemed to do better than other things. Also, I love putting words on paper. There are parts of writing I don't like. Like, I don't like the blank page, when you're just staring at your laptop or your phone or a piece of paper and you're going, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to write?" That scares me, and I get really, really nervous. But I love rewriting, strangely enough. My husband's just the opposite. He loves the blank page and he hates rewriting. So, we all have our different strengths. But I started writing just to pay the rent, and then I realized, I actually love doing this. And it was a good fit for me. It can be very frustrating because you have to work alone a lot. You have to be self-disciplined, something I'm still working on, by the way. I'm really bad with deadlines. But I love making stuff up. And I think it's such an honor to write for young readers. My favorite readers in the world are exactly your age, because you guys are so imaginative, and you're just starting to really fall in love with books, and you're very honest and you're idealistic and creative. I mean, to me, there's nothing I'd rather write than a book for middle readers. So it's a pretty cool job.
All right, thank you. Now, besides some of our students who had excellent questions, we also have some of your biggest fan club members, which are some of the adults that have joined us after the presentation. So I think I saw Ms. Singleton. Did you have your hand up? Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Katherine, it's a dream come true for me. My favorite book is Home of the Brave. I was wondering if there will be a sequel to that book, and if not, it was so moving when Keck met his mother at the airport because we surely thought she was no longer alive. What do you see in Keck's future now that he's been reunited with his mother?
Oh, what a beautiful question. And I'm so glad you like that book. When I wrote it, it was kind of my first venture into what I call grown-up writing. And it was free verse, and it was about a Sudanese refugee. So it wasn't exactly designed to be a bestseller. And I can't believe it's still in print, let alone that it's been used in so many classrooms. It's really hugely gratifying. And I've had kids ask me about what happens to Keck. Keck, if you haven't read the book, I love this guy. He's really an optimist. He's a refugee. He's gone through horrible war, and he's all alone in a new country. And he's just like relentlessly hopeful. And I wanted him to be that way because I am not that way. I'm kind of a pessimist at heart. And I wanted to see what it was like to be that person. And I think Keck will have gone on to thrive. I'm glad you like the reunion with the mom. I've had some people say to me, no, it was too hopeful. It was too happy. But I'm sorry, I had to give that kid a happy ending. He deserved to have his mom come back. And I think, like so many refugees in our country, he'd struggle. He'd work very, very hard. He'd contribute in important ways. And I think he would really blossom. I've thought about doing a sequel, but I think he needs to go on and live his own life. I always tell kids, once that book is in your hand, what happens to those characters is entirely up to you. I mean, seriously, that story belongs to you. It's not mine anymore. So you decide what happens to Keck.
We have maybe time for one more question. Is there any follow-up questions that any of our students may have, or any of the adults that have joined us?
I do want to tell you that if you're an aspiring writer, and sometimes the people I talk to are secretly aspiring writers, and they don't, and that's how I was. I wouldn't have told anybody I liked writing stories. Even when I didn't like to read, I actually wrote some stories. And I think I have so many kids ask me about publishing. Certainly adults ask me about it all the time, but even kids. And if you're interested in publishing, there are lots of ways to do it when you're young. There are magazines. Your librarian can help you with that. There are places online where you can contribute your writing. But it's so much more important to fall in love with the written word, to love your writing, and to really want to connect your heart with those words on the page. And that's what matters. So don't worry so much about publishing or anything else. Just have fun with it. You don't have to share it with anyone. It belongs to you. And that's the most important thing, I think, to remember about writing.
Right. Well, Katherine and RJ Julia, I can't thank you enough. We love your books. We use them every single day in our classroom. Not only, the written, the story that it tells, but also the messages behind the stories that you have written. And it's nice to see that a presenter brings the enthusiasm that you bring and that you know, are so open and welcoming and inviting, and I think very inspiring for many of our young authors, as well as some of the adults that have joined our presentation. So again, we look forward to eating up anything that you write. We can't wait for the next book to hit our mailboxes. A lot of us have already pre-ordered that text. So we're going to dive right in.
good.
And again, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a real joy. Now go read some books, guys.
Absolutely.
And
All right. Thank you so much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.